We're going to start, as I mentioned on Sunday, we're going to start within the liturgy, we're going to start doing it, reading prayer page 28. And I would recommend highly that whenever you study the Bible on your own, if you're going to do it by yourself, yes, you should. The Bible study shouldn't be a intellectual thing. It should be more of a spiritual exercise. So although we bring the intellectual into it, it's still a spiritual exercise because we're talking about something that God gave us. It's His revelation. So it's not something that someone discovered about God, it's what God disclosed. So because of that, it's very good to say, God, you disclosed this, help me understand what it is that you're trying to share with me. So the prayer, I think, is very important. Every church that I've ever ministered to, we use this. And if you go to certain churches, you'll find the people who know it by heart. And I know the altar boys that I've always had in the churches, they know it by heart too. In Boca, the kids would come out and lead the people without a book. They could do it. So hopefully we can get there too, but I mean, it takes time. Things have to be done step by step. Yeah. In the mood, put you in a receptive mode. So if you can rise then and turn to page 28. Let us pray to the Lord. You would say, Lord, have mercy. And then together. Illumine our hearts, loving Master, with the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in us also deep respect for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things that are pleasing to you. For you, Christ, our Lord, are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory, together with your Father, who is without beginning. You are all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forevermore. Amen. Again, thank you for staying. To me, this is not, I don't see this as a work at all. I enjoy it very much. It's a pleasure to do it, especially if you want to learn. I've said many times, I'm going to say it again just as a refresher, that you really cannot understand the New Testament without understanding the Old Testament. And I hope you realize that Jesus, when he quoted Scripture, he quoted the Old Testament. There was no New Testament. So everything that he said, a lot of the parables, a lot of the stories, a lot of the nuances of many of the things he said were exegesis, an explanation of Old Testament things. So in order to understand what he said in the New Testament, you have to understand the context of the Old Testament. That's why I keep sending you back to the Old Testament. We don't know, as Orthodox Christians, and I say this, it's not your fault, it's our fault. The majority of Greek Orthodox Christians do not know their Bible. 98% they don't know the Bible. And even those who think they know it, they may know some of the New Testament, they don't know it the way they should. And that's a tragedy. It's a huge tragedy. Because if you don't know the Bible, you'll never understand the liturgy. If you don't understand the liturgy becomes boring, it doesn't make any sense, and people stop coming. And that's what happened. That's why Orthodox, if you know, nobody comes to, very few people come to Orthodox. They may come, some people come, because they like the aura, of being in church, but they don't know what's going on. They don't get it. And again, it's not your fault. We have to do a better job to explain it to you and try to make the connections for you. There's so much going on, sometimes we don't know where to start. So that's why I hope I'm not pedantic by giving you little things. But I think I'd rather have you learn these little things and try to teach you these big things, and you'll miss them. So step at a time, give you the resources, give you the tools, and then you'll start to make the connections on your own. So I don't want to make you dependent on me. I want to teach you how to do it on your own. So irrespective of who's here, if you know the technique, you can do it on your own. That's why I say to you, you want to understand a feast day of the church, go to the Orthodox, go to the Synexadia. which is the synexario, tells you what the day is, and it gives you theological bullet points, so to speak. And then go to the hymns of the Orthodox service. And the hymns of the Orthodox service are nothing more than Bible studies, theological Bible studies of the day. So, like today, for example, is an example. When I started, when the hymns called the Peter and Paul the pillars of the church, you have to know the Old Testament. If you know the Old Testament, then you know about the two pillars that I talked about, the right and the left. And so the church is making these connections to people who knew the Bible back then, 4th century. Now, you don't know the Bible, you hear the hymns, and at best, if you understand the Greek, at best, you hear and you say, poetry. You don't make the connections because you don't know the Old Testament. You follow what I'm saying? So in order to really make it work, it's not just language. So there are people who think that, if we do everything in English, everything will be perfect. No, absolutely not. That would be saying that everybody who goes to college gets an A when they finish their classes. It's in English, isn't it, right? They should get it, right? But they don't. Well, the church is even worse because it's very intricate. There's a lot of stuff going on, you see? So you need someone to kind of help you make the connections. And so that's my job. My job is to take the theology of the church, choose a hymn, find the Old Testament, and make those connections with you. And that's why people say, I like your sermons because I didn't know that. I didn't know this. Well, I presuppose you don't know it. That's why I'm doing it. And it excites you because it makes the connection. You see? So it proves to me that the church fathers knew what they were doing. The issue is I just have to make the connections again for you. Does that make any sense? Yes. So, sure.
When I come to Orthodox, I give those. I only with something, I try to. I found that today I found that there only the last I wanted to follow you because I don't understand the Greek side. I follow the English and I can't like.
So I'm not following. What is the question?
To follow the service for the Orthodox.
The Orthodox has nothing to do with that book. Zero.
But there are some.
Just the petitions. Just the petitions.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
The same petitions are in Vespers. The same petitions are in the Compline service. Yeah, that's the skeleton of the petitions. That's not the service.
So can I go on the computer?
Yes. Yes. If you go to, let me think of the website. I can't think of the website. Peter knows because he goes there, and it's downloaded. You can download the Orthodox in Greek and English, so it's side by side. Now, just so you know, no Orthodox is ever the same. It's never the same. Never.
It's for the congregations to stay that way. So you mean the book that you have right now? Every Sunday is different?
Correct. That's why we have a subscription. Remember that subscription that we get from North Express?
Right.
Okay. So North Express, he was a friend. He was my spiritual father, by the way. Father Contos, Father Alexander Contos, who was the president of Berkeley. He came up with this idea to start a company called North Express with another priest in Northridge, California, Father Kezios, Father Spencer Kezios. Father Spencer's still alive, but Father Contos passed away probably about 8 years now. And what they did was they sat down and they would translate the Orthodox service. First of all, they would calculate the service, translate it, and produce a book for the next year. So they were always a year ahead. So parishes would buy a subscription, and they would send us 4 volumes a year, and each volume has a quarter of the year in it. Just the Sunday Orthodox. Just the Sunday. There's an Orthodox every day. Now, in order to calculate that, they have to calculate when does Easter fall that year? Changes. When does Pentecost fall? Changes. and then the day of Sundays. So, for example, the 29th this year, it was a Saturday. Next year, the 29th will be what? It'll be Sunday, so it goes ahead. So, what we did as an Orthodox service yesterday will become the Orthodox service of Sunday. However, when a feast day goes on a Sunday as opposed to the...
Next year will be on Wednesday. It's not going to be Sunday.
Oh, so it's a Wednesday.
Sorry. The 29th will be on Monday.
So see, I don't, is it a leap year?
This was, this was the 28th of February. Next year will be 29 days of that.
So it's leap year.
Not February, did I say February? I meant June.
June 29th is a Monday.
June 29th.
Right, because February will have 29.
Yes.
So it's a leap year.
Yeah. So you can see, just figuring this out, so it just so happened that it fell on, the 30th fell on a Sunday, so you've got the synexes of the apostles falling on a Sunday, which adjusts the Sunday Orthodox service. One takes precedence over the other, because it's a feast day of the church. If this was not a feast day of the church, the Orthodox day that we did would have been different. Let's say the feast of Demetrius, the feast day of St. Demetrius, 26th of October. Let's say if it fell on a Sunday, that feast day would, that Orthodox of that feast day would change the Orthodox of that Sunday. That would be typical. The hymn would change. So no Orthodox is ever the same. There is no such thing as a book of Orthodox.
But could, like, for example, Saturday night, would I be printed?
Yes. So there's a website that has the Orthodox service of the Sundays that you can print out and choose what you want. And that's what sometimes people come to church with. And they can use, that's what he uses. So if you ask him where the website, I don't remember the website. That's it. Ages. So it's like AEEA, something like that. It's not AG. It'll come up. And there's all kinds of stuff on there. It's not just Orthodox. You can download all kinds of things. Now, you have to be careful because the Orthodox service oftentimes there that you'll get is more than what we do. It's really the monastic typicon. So you're going to get more than you need, more than you need. So you'll see we skipped some stuff because if we did the whole Orthodox, it could be an hour and a half. It would take forever. It's a monastic typicon. But there's more there than you need. My point is that that's the university of our faith is in the services of the church because they're Bible studies of the Old Testament. That's why any feast day, and with this I'll go into the actual Genesis, any feast day of the church, feast days, now big feast days, you go to the Vesper service of the day before, which is the beginning of the day, right? So you know that. The Vespers begins the day with sunset, not sunrise. Sunset begins the day. Why? Because the Bible counts the days that way. So we start the day at Vespers. At Vesper service of major feast days, there are 3 readings of the Old Testament at a Vesper service. So, I mean, I've encountered one individual here when I first came. Said, Father, why are you teaching so much from the Old Testament? We're Greek Orthodox, we don't use the Old Testament. I thought he was kidding. I said, well, that's really not true. And I told him this, I showed him that, and he was blown away. He had no idea.
Well, you make it more evident other priests.
Yeah.
They just take it as it's a regular.
Right, he had no idea. And
when you had the service for my mother, there were a couple of people from the Jewish faith. After the service of my mom's burial, a couple of them never would come. They were going to come and join your church because you did a little bit of the
Sure. Yeah.
So they were like, oh, we're going to join. And I said, well, maybe I'll come to your temple too.
Sure, you should. Yeah. Well, in Boca, the temple's right next door, so we used to do things together.
But you make it evident, others are
Yeah.
not.
Thank you. Sure.
I just want to say that isn't there an outline of the orders?
Yes.
That I think most of us, most of the people, I don't study the orders a lot, but isn't there an outline
So there's a book by Holy Cross Press. So if you go to online, you go to Holy Cross Press, which is the bookstore of the seminary. Holy Cross Press also has some books that they publish. And they have like what you're saying, they have the Outline Vespers book, they have Orthodox book, but just so you know, that's only the skeleton.
Which is important, but also the people. When we hear authors,
Yeah.
it's not a thing that's so regular either.
No, because it's long. You know, if you come to church at 9 o'clock, you've got to stay until, I mean, it's a long time. So in order to become zealous, you know, yeah, you got to really make those connections. So that's why I want to give you the tools so you can prepare outside of the church. So when you come, you're already a step ahead, so to speak. So the point that I was trying to make here is that every time we have a Vesper service, the feast day, there are 3 readings always in the Vesper service that are Bible studies for the feast day. They're chosen on purpose to teach you about what's going to happen on the feast day. And they're always chosen from the 3 sections of the Old Testament. The Old Testament has 3 sections in it. So the best way to learn the Bible is to understand the sections. Instead of looking at it as a, 60 some odd books, it's better to say, okay, what are the sections? So there are 3 sections in the Old Testament. History, poetry, and prophecy. Those 3. And oftentimes the poetry is called wisdom. So history, literature, wisdom literature, prophetic literature. Those 3 sections. So every time you come to a Vesper service, the church actually chooses one from each section. Now, who made these sections? The Jews. We just inherited from them. We didn't make it up on our own. We Christians were Jews who accepted Jesus as the Messiah. So they didn't take the Old Testament throw it away. They integrated it. And so when you went to a synagogue and you worshipped, they worshipped by looking at one reading from each section. So what does the church do? The church says, we're going to do the same thing. At Vespers, which represents the Old Testament, the darkness, you see, we're going to do the same thing. Orthodox, we're going to start the light a little bit more with some New Testament, and then the liturgy with the gospel, and at the end what do we say? We have seen the light, Ida Metaphos. See, so there's a logic to it. There's a logic to it, especially when John says, in the beginning was the Word was God, and God. So basically he's saying that the light, the Word of the Old Testament and the New Testament is Jesus Christ. So how can you have a relationship with Jesus Christ if you don't know the Word? It doesn't make any sense. So Chrysostom, if you read Chrysostom, that's his big thing. In all of his sermons, over and over, and that's all he says is, read the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible. That's all he talks about. So if we're going to lift him up and say, he's a great preacher, and we're going to use his liturgy, and then we don't study the Bible, are we honoring him? No, I don't think we are. So what are the 3 sections? So the history is the first 5 books. It's called the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books. They're called the books of Moses. The first 5 books. Jesus quotes predominantly from there. Most of his quotes come from the book of Deuteronomy. So if you really want to understand Jesus, what he's talking about most of the time, that's where you go, Deuteronomy. But he also quotes wisdom literature and prophetic literature. The wisdom literature is Proverbs. I think I had some stuff here. Proverbs and the book of Job is the predominant. There's some apocryphal books, the wisdom of Sarah, and some other things. For example, a Holy Saturday morning, when we read that long, the prayer of Azarias and all of that, that's apocryphal Old Testament books, but they're books of wisdom. They're wisdom books. So it's interesting that Jesus, when he was asking about the resurrection, he says, you have the book of Job, you don't need it anymore. That's enough. So when he's pointing to the wisdom books. Okay? So we always read history, something from Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, something there, something from wisdom. Job, we like Job quite a bit in the church. Also from Proverbs, something. Now, why not Psalms? Because we read the Psalms all the time. Every service we read them. It's not special for us. So, as a matter of fact, we read the Psalms, all of the Psalms, during Great Lent. If you come to all the services of Great Lent, you will have gone through the Psalms. We read right through the Psalms, all of them, during Great Lent. The monks read the Psalms twice, all the way through. We read them once, all the way through. And then the other is prophecy, the books of prophecy. Now the big guns of prophecy, of course, is Isaiah and Ezekiel. Those are the two. What's the difference between a major and a minor prophet? Either the major prophets and the minor prophets. You're a major prophet. Ezekiel, major prophet. So what's the difference between him and, let's say, Amos? No, they all had it. That's not. You're going to laugh when I tell you what the real answer is. The length of the book. If it's a long book, he's a major prophet. If it's a short book, he's a minor prophet. That's it. It has nothing to do with who's better or who's more important. You know, for years I thought, you know, when I was younger, as a kid, that all the major prophets, they got, you know, heavy-duty information. No, the book is longer. That's it. The scroll is longer. And usually for the Jews, because the scrolls were only so long. So if they needed 2 scrolls, major prophet. If they only needed 1 scroll, minor prophet. Simple as that. So that tells me, just that tells me that if I really want to know the Old Testament, and I don't want to read all of it, because you may get stuck in Leviticus, for example. A lot of people say, I'm going to read the Bible through. They start doing really well until they get to Leviticus. And when they get to Leviticus, they go, oh my God, and then they give up. Well, Leviticus, don't worry about Leviticus. Leviticus is the book for the priest, the book of the rabbi. So it's really not necessary for you to read it. So that's why we don't even have it, we don't read from Leviticus. We don't do it. So if I was going to say to you, if you're going to say to me, Father Frank, I want to read the Bible, at least as a start, what should I read? Well, I would tell you to read the books that the church chooses to select during the Vesper services. Which are they? Genesis and Exodus and Deuteronomy. Those 3. Ezekiel and Isaiah. And Proverbs and the book of Job. That's it. Read those. Understand them fairly well. And then you've got a pretty good handle of stuff. So Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. Prophet. Old Testament. So he's one of the prophetic writers. So there are. Old Testament, it'll be in the middle of the Old Testament, you'll find the prophets. And then you read, as I said, the Proverbs and Job, those 2. And so that's what we're going to focus on. That's what I want to focus on with you. Wisdom. And then they move into the New Testament. And of course, the majority of the New Testament are epistles. They're not Gospels. The majority. The epistles. And the epistles are really good for you all to read because the epistles are the letters to the community. So they're called pastoral, typically. In other words, from the pastor to the people. So how come you're doing this? How come you're not doing that? It's that kind of stuff. The Gospels point to the Old Testament more so than anything. And then the book of Revelation is the prophecy. So if you want to understand the book of Revelation, you have to know Ezekiel. Ezekiel is considered the book of Revelation in the Old Testament. If you want a book that corresponds to the book of Revelation, it would be Ezekiel. As a matter of fact, as you're reading the book of Revelation, if you have already read Ezekiel, you'll say that John is stealing from Ezekiel. But then he's not stealing. What's happening is, because they were both brought up into heaven, they saw the same thing, and so therefore they described it the same. Which is pretty cool. You see that. There's some differences, but for the most part, they're the same. That's why, as I mentioned before, and by the way, we have someone that's thinking about donating a Pantocrator. Yeah, I've been talking to someone and they're serious about doing it. So we've been talking about, where it would go, how it would be done, and all this kind of stuff. But in a proper church, the Pantocrator is the iconography of the Pantocrator. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Jesus, God up there. So is right from the book of Revelation and the book of Ezekiel. That's where the iconographer gets the theology for that. So when you see, for example, what they're called the pendentives, 4 circles around the Pantocrator. So you have the Pantocrator, and it's got certain colors around it. Those colors are coming right from the book of Ezekiel. The colors. Who is up there right out of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation? The 4 evangelists right out of the book of Ezekiel, right? The Revelation. So when people come into an Orthodox church and they say, you guys are not biblical, no, you don't know the Bible. But the issue is that we need to know it too, so we can explain it to them and say, no, look, let me show you. And then they get blown away. That's a good question. We don't have a dome. So it would be a flat. And there are iconographers that make it look like it's a dome, but it's flat. The issue is where it would be. In my estimation, the only place to put it is here. You'd have to move these 2 guys, close up that, and you put it here. Otherwise, you put it, they don't want to see it. It'd be too small. There's not enough room there. But you could do it here, make it pretty nice. What you don't want to do, I may die tomorrow. So, someone might come here and say, well, put it there. Then they take the chandelier and stick it out in the middle of it. Don't ever do that. That is just the tackiest thing I've ever seen. Oh, really? Yeah, it's done. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, it can be done. In Boca we did it, and we had a free floating dome. You don't even want to know what it costs to do that. When I first told them this is what we need to do, they were going to hang me. Because we looked at the contractor, and the contractor said, you want to do what? A free floating dome. With that side, there are no pillars in that church. It floats, everything floats. And the way it's done is the way the beams are, and the church pushes in. So you have the church is actually pushing in as that's pushing down, and the balance is the free-floating dome without any pillars. So you need nothing to abstract it. It's the most expensive way to do it. But now that they did, everybody takes credit for it. They go, oh yes, we have a free-floating dome. Yeah. But it was expensive. Okay, so I hope this makes some sense to you. I'm trying to give you a frame, and then you can start filling in the frame with the information. So from what I just said, at a Vesper service, if you want to understand the Vesper service, which book do you think you would go to? Which one in the Old Testament? Yes. I think someone said it. No, I think it's very close. Further, a little bit further back. Genesis. So the book of Genesis, the first 4 chapters of the book of Genesis is the Vesper service. Is the Vesper service. Now, we start our services, almost every service starts with what do we do in almost in every service to start? What do we read from?
Is this your 9 o'clock service or your 10 o'clock?
Every service. Believe it or not, every service, it's the same thing. It's just a different piece of the book that I'm talking about. You may not realize it, but I'll give you the answer. The Psalms. So when we sing, for example, Desperas Vias, and then he's singing some verses, those are all, those are Psalms.
That's what I want to ask you, Father. Always is put something in front of God.
Right. Psalms.
Right.
Verses from the Psalms.
How does it work? This book tells you which one to put
Yes.
for that Sunday?
Yes.
So on the website.
Yes. Yep. Same thing with the epistles. Now the epistles are actually been chosen already, so if you buy it as a book, do you use the book from in there, right? Okay, so there's an actual book of the epistles of the church based on dates. And it already has the Old Testament verses chosen there. So they're there. So you just look up and find June the 30th. You go to the, if it's a liturgy, you go to the epistle and it tells you the verses. It's already there. It's already there. They're already made the connections for you.
There's an app called the Daily Readings.
Yes.
The Daily Readings, that also will give you the epistle and the gospel. And
Does it give you the verses too?
it doesn't give you the extra verses.
I know the Archdiocese does, but it's not an app. So if you go to the Archdiocese chapel, so you go goarch.org, and then you go to the chapel page. And on the chapel page, it'll actually say what date are you looking for. You put in what date you want. It'll give you the gospel and the epistle in Greek and in English with the verses. It's there. I think that's where you go then, right? Don't you go there for stuff? You go there.
So the ones that I wrote is chanting, who's the verses on top of it.
Yes.
Those really get those at the
Pages will do it. Or you can get it, if it's in the liturgy, you get it from GoArch. It's there. The GoArch
Because
stuff.
I like to, it's like you follow this book and it's not.
No, it's not, you're not going to get in there. This is just a frame.
Yeah, and you want it and have something here to follow.
Yeah, you can't. It'd be too expensive. You couldn't do it. You'd have it costs you thousands of dollars a month. Oh yeah, because each one of those books, how much do we pay just for one volume? Can you now imagine having in the pews and they change every year? Oh, you can't do it. This is the way to do it. Now the technology gives you the opportunity to come to church with a pad, an iPad, and in your iPad you can actually have pages on it and you can follow the service or print it out. That's the way to do it. I guess what I'm trying to impress upon you is that the worship of the Orthodox Church is complicated. It's very complicated. And in order to at least understand how it all comes together, you got to know the Bible. So you got to start somewhere. So what I'm trying to do is give you just a framework and then start filling in the puzzles pieces. We're not going to be able to do the whole thing, but at least I can kind of give you the tools so that you can do it on your own. There is no other way. It's a lifetime. So when I sermonize, for example, I've already started my research for next Sunday. I'm 2 weeks ahead. I'm already looking. So what I do is I'll do this research. I'll go to the hymns, I go to the readings of the epistle, I go to the Old Testament. I like the hymns, I'll spend a lot of time on the hymns. I go to the church fathers if they have anything to say about that. And then I let it go. And I wait for something to happen to give me something to connect to the world. So I use my right eye, and then I use my left eye, and then I bring the two together. So that's just, I share with you my model. And when I taught preaching for 10 years at the seminary, and that's what I would try to teach my students, how to do that. And I found it, if you allow me to express my frustration, I found it quite, what word would I use? Disappointing, unnerving, upsetting, that many of these students rejected that. No, I wish it was that. They said that, no, the people don't want to hear what's going on in the world. They want to come to church and escape what's going on in their daily lives. And I'd say, you better go and read Chrysostom. Chrysostom, basically, in a sense, says you should read the Bible with the newspaper in your lap. To connect the Word of God with life. You've got to connect it. Otherwise, didn't Jesus say, you are the light of the world? You are the salt of the world. If the salt loses its savor, what good is it? In other words, it has to connect. You are the light of the world. You don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel, it says. You put it on a lampstand. So the same thing with the church. If the church, all it cares about is close the doors and let's come here and let's just, have our own little party, what good is that? That's not our job. Our job is to go out and preach, so to speak. And you are the messengers of the church after liturgy. After liturgy, you go out. There's a couple of books that have been written. One in particular, it's called The Liturgy After the Liturgy. If you haven't read that book, I recommend it highly. The Liturgy After the Liturgy, written by I think it's a Russian monk. And he emphasizes that the liturgy it doesn't end when we say the One. It doesn't end when we say through the prayers of the Holy Fathers. It begins then. He says, so liturgy is what on the first day of the week gives you the juice, gives you the energy to go out into the world and take the liturgy to the world and transfigure the world as we were transfigured in here on a Sunday. It's pretty powerful. So liturgy is not an event. It's a means. It's a grace. I hope this is making some sense. I don't want to start getting too over the heads. So, how did we get over there? What was the question? How did I get way over there? Oh, about preaching. About preaching. And the students would say no. And so I would force them. They had to give sermons, at the chapel. And the ones that didn't do it the way I wanted to do it, they always got the worst grades. Not from me, because I had the people grade them. I would give out evaluations. The guy would give his sermon, and then the people would evaluate. And the ones that get the worst grades were the ones that didn't do it my way. They did it. So today is Saint Demetrius. Saint Demetrius lived in the 4th century. Saint Demetrius, blah, blah, blah. It had nothing to do with anything. It was a history lesson. So is that important? Yeah, it's important. But you have to take that piece, the right eye, and you got to get the left eye, and you got to balance it. Otherwise, what are we doing here? But is that theology not good? Question. So does this make any sense? So the reason why I'm sharing that with you is that now for you, as you study the Bible, or as we study the Bible, we do the same thing. We're studying the scriptures, internalizing it. But then we got to find a way to connect it. Otherwise, it becomes stale. There's no purpose to it, other than maybe make us arrogant. And that's not good. Or triumphant, which could be worse. Anyway, I'm preaching and I'm not doing the Bible study. So let's turn to page 3, which leaves us 15 minutes. Well, another thing that let me share with you, and this is part of the praxis of Bible study, is when you say, okay, I'm going to study the Bible on myself, on my own. Decide when and how long and stick with it. So if you say, I'm going to do it before I go to bed for half an hour, When the half an hour comes and you may want to continue, don't. No? You said a half an hour? Ooh, I want more. No? Half hour. Why? Because there's going to be another night when you only do it for 10 minutes and you say, oh, I don't want to do this. No? Half hour. So don't let Satan take you too far, and don't let him take you too shallow. Make a decision and stick with it. Be obedient to your, that's what they call the rule, to your rule, and stick with it. Because then if you have a spiritual father, what's an important barometer is when you sit down with him, or if it's a nun, you sit down with her, and you sit down, they will ask you, okay, in your rule, where is your problem? Is your problem you want to go too long, or is your problem you want to go too short? And then you can fix it. You see, it's a barometer. It's almost as though saying, what kind of blood pressure do you have? Is it high blood pressure or is it low blood pressure? You know, both are bad. We want to find isotopia, we want to find equilibrium. Oh, sure, no, it's great. Yeah, yes. Oh, yeah. No, as long as it's not the only way. Yeah, because you don't want to turn it into entertainment. You know, and it can become entertainment. That's why I like the prayer. It kind of sets it up and says, okay, now what am I doing here? This is not research in the library, although that is important too sometimes, depending on how deep you want to go to something. I'm doing a Bible study prayerfully with the Lord, and I'm going to do it. Now, you do that, you have your rule, then you get in your car and you want to listen to the Bible, whatever. Sure, absolutely. Both is good. Okay, so is that okay? Are we all on the same page now? So if you turn to page 3, I know what I was going to do. Turn to page 685. Which is Psalm 8. Psalm 8. So Psalm 8 is so David wrote most of the Psalms, not all of them, but many of them, although they're attributed to him, but we know that he didn't write them all. The Psalms look back in the history books. So oftentimes the Psalms are nothing more than Bible studies of the Old Testament. But they're poetic. So Psalm 8 is important, and we use it in the church oftentimes because it talks about the first chapter of Genesis. As you will see, I'll read it to you. So it's a Psalm of David, it says, O Lord, our Lord, how wonderful is your name in all the earth. Okay, so right away it's connecting God to the earth. For your splendor is exalted far beyond the heavens. Now the heavens. You see, already it's saying that God is exalted on the earth and the name above the heavens. So we call that the sovereignty of God, the dominion of God. So here's a lepomedia for you, a detail. Again, I would say 99% Orthodox Christians don't know this. And I would say that probably a percentage of priests don't know it either. Is that twice, once in the Orthros and once in the liturgy, do you hear, for thine is the dominion, the kingdom, the power, and the glory. That's only done once in the Orthros and once in the liturgy. Otherwise you hear, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Kingdom, power, and glory. Kingdom, power, and glory. You hear that over and over and over again. All of a sudden, once in the Orthros and once in the liturgy, you hear, for thine is the dominion, the kingdom, the power, and the glory. That's significant. Kratos.
So how do we say it? So
Και το κράτος της βασιλείας, η δύναμη και η δόξα. So kratos, this is why people say, oh, everything has to be in Greek. No. Because kratos in the Testament, in modern Greek, what is kratos? Nation. Country. That's not what kratos means in liturgical language. Kratos means sovereignty. It means dominion. That's why it's translated dominion. Now, what's dominion? How is dominion different than kingdom? You might say, well, they're the same thing. For the dominion, the kingdom, the power, and the glory, are those two words synonymous? No. There's quite a bit of a difference between dominion and kingdom. What's the difference? No, see, that's not, the word is not, no. See, the word kratos is not to dominate, to an overbearing. Okay? Sovereignty, and this is the word, by the way, it's used in the first chapter of Genesis. That's why I'm bringing it up. In the first chapter of Genesis, who's the one that has dominion over the earth? No? He gives it to man. And may you have dominion over the... Okay, now the Hebrew word there is not to dominate creation. This is what the environmentalists do. They say, you Christians, it's because of you that we have these problems in the environment, because of Christian Bible and Jewish Bible, you are dominating the environment and manipulating it and using it. No, absolutely incorrect. Totally incorrect. That's not what the Hebrew word means. Sovereignty and dominion does not mean to dominate. I'm trying to think of another word. To be overbearing, to manipulate, to use for selfish purposes. Quite the opposite. It means that my job is to be, the better word is to be a caretaker, a steward, an overseer. That it's like, no, it's not that at all. It's like when you have a baby at home and someone says, I want you to oversee the baby. What, are you going to manipulate the baby? No, what does that mean? Care, love, be sensitive. That's what the word means. So when God says, I'm going to share with you, because you're made in my image and likeness, I'm going to share with you some of my dominion. And I'm going to allow you to have dominion over the earth only. But God has dominion over the whole deal. That's a whole different ballgame. So we have to understand what is the dominion of God in order to understand what the dominion of mankind is. We have to understand the kingdom of heaven in order to understand the kingdom of earth. We have to understand the power of God in the Trinity in order to understand how to use power here. You follow? Because if we don't, we're going to make power in our own image, not in the image of God. The power in the image of the Trinity is sacrifice, is love, is humility. Right? And didn't Paul say that Jesus, who is God, the word is kenosis, he emptied himself and he became a human being. That expresses the love of God. The love of God is his dominion. That's what goes on in the Trinity. You see, it's not the power of this world. The power of this world, if someone says, I have power, what does that mean? They're controlling, right? I have power. No, in the Trinity, power is to give up that and to turn it around. You see? So this is where we get into the mysticism of the church, to understand what the Trinity is. So to go back to what dominion is. So dominion is what God's authority outside of creation. So the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth are created by God. I hope you understand that. Okay? They have boundaries to them. Because they're created. There was a time in which they did not exist. He created the heavens. He created the earth. Well, what existed before that? Nothing. Except for God. Okay? Otherwise, if there was a time in which God was not, then he would be God. He's God because he has no beginning, he has no end. So this God said out of his love, expressed something of himself and created the kingdom of heaven with the angels and the kingdom of earth where we are. And he wanted the two to be together to share in the love and the life that exists in God. He wanted to share some of that. So he took ex nihilo, nothing. He didn't take anything. There was no ilico. There was no material. He created out of nothing in order to share some of his energy, not his nature, not his essence. And he created us. But we are within boundaries because we were created and there's an end. See, there's an end to the kingdom of this world that then goes into the kingdom of heaven that was created by God for eternity, but was created by God. Well, God's sovereignty, his dominion, is not just there. His dominion exists outside of that, which we could never experience. That's what we're talking about here. In other words, I could never understand the dominion of God. That's outside of my capabilities as a human being. Because I'm a created being. I can't even begin to imagine what that means. Now, why is that important? Because you cannot take God's sovereignty and limit it. The moment we limit it, that means that it was created, that it can't be part of God. I hope that makes sense. So this is a very deep theological point, but it's very important. So, and that's why we only say it once in the liturgy, once in the... We say it, it's almost as though, okay, I said it, now I can't understand it, I let it go. And now I'm going to focus on what I can understand. Kingdom, power, and glory. You see that? Kingdom I can understand. Glory I can understand. Power I can understand within the kingdom. But dominion outside, I have no idea what that means. All I know is that within the kingdom, he is not only king, but he also has a dominion. He expresses a dominion that actually extends outside of it. It's super duper sovereignty. Super duper sovereignty. I hope this makes some sense. So Psalm 8 is talking about this. It's beginning to talk about this. Yes. Right. Oh, so we share his energies. We make this distinction. We share God's energies, not his essence. In other words, he didn't take part of himself. We are not gods, but we share his breath, and the energy of God is in us. So we are in his image, which means we have some sovereignty in us, we have some power in us, we have some glory in us. We create, because he creates. We can express love because he expresses love. We can judge because he judges. So all of the characteristics of human beings find their root in God. Now, if we therefore want to use those characteristics in a God-like fashion, we have to know who God is so that we mimic him. But there are people that say, no, I am not created by God. I'm my own person, and I can do whatever I want to do. And before you know it, you have kids shooting other kids in high schools, and then they say, who are you to tell me what I did was wrong?
How do you teach them to be the right way?
If you can answer that question, then you know. Yeah. It is hard. It is, and that's why some of the saints say, the issue is save yourself. In other words, make yourself a beacon of God's presence, and people will see it and will say, there's something special about that person. That's the only way you can do it, is to be a witness, like these guys, a witness. Guys, sorry. You follow what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about. Correct. It's like the sun. Palamas uses the image of the sun, not the son and the father, the sun, the oidos, the sun. So we cannot experience the essence of the sun, right? Because if we experience the essence of the sun, we'd be burned up and we'd die. But we do experience the energies of the sun, heat, light. That's the energy, right? So there is a difference between something's essence and something's energies. We are created and experience the energies of God. The essence of God is unknowable. We cannot understand it, unknowable, incomprehensible, all that stuff. The dominion of God, that's where it is. It's in the essence of God. The energies of God is the expression of the inner workings of God. And that's what Gregory Palamas is talking about. That's the uncreated, where he says that if God is light, the closer you get to God, ultimately you will be in darkness. And that's exactly correct, right? If you go into a room and there's a light, a bright light, the closer you get to that light, what happens? You get blind. It goes dark. And that's what he's talking about. If he is the light, I can only get so close. And then when I get to a point where it gets black, means I can't go any closer. He now is coming to me. And I have to come in humility, let it go, and know that God is approaching me. Another saint put it this way, he says, you climb a ladder and you reach a point where you have to jump off and trust God at the top. You cannot struggle your way to God. You can only go so high, you can only go so far, you can only go so close, because the energies cannot connect to the essence. I know that I'm probably confusing it, but you brought it up. You want to fool around with Gregory Palamas, then you're going to...
Last time I was reading Psalterium, which I do most of.
And the Psalterium is the book of Psalms.
Yes. He was amazing in one page, totally, and my hair stood down reading, and he said, I created the water, the ocean, I created the mountains, I created the helium, I created the sky, I created you. And I read it, I don't know how many times before I grasped a little bit what God was trying to say in the Psalterium. By creating everything that is universe, I did that
For you, yes. That's the point.
It was truly amazing chapter.
And so therefore, we have a responsibility to enjoy it and use it accordingly. See, and that's where the rub is. So what you just did now is you told me right eye, a lot of right eye. Now the issue is, how do I take that and interpret that, apply it to the left eye? And that's where the problems come up. Some people say, what does it mean? And before you know it, you get books after books after books explaining, well, how do we do that? And we would say, sacramentally. I take everything that God has given me, and I enjoy it by offering it back to Him. So I build things with what He gave me for His glory, not mine. So I'm doing for Him what He's actually doing for me, and so therefore I'm actually becoming God-like. That's why in the greatest image of that is a mother giving birth to a child. She brings it with her husband and then presents it back to God. Isn't that fantastic? That's the first thing she does 40 days later. She comes to the church and says, here, I give it back to the person who gave it to me. The church, I receive it. She just gave it to me. This is what, they think that I'm doing some kind of, that they think I'm the local, what's the guy, not the magic man, what do you call those guys? In Africa, they would bring it to the local, the tribe doctor, what was he called? The medicine man. Like, I'm the medicine man, the local medicine man. Oh, we have a baby, bring it to the medicine man, he's going to say a couple of prayers over it, and now it's, safe, I don't know, for good luck, I don't know. No, you're bringing it to the church and you're saying, I recognize the gift that God gave me. I co-created with God. And now I give it back to God to make sure that He knows that I know, and it's more about me, that He knows that I know that it really belongs to Him, so am I. So I give the baby back, the priest takes it, brings it into the church, gives it to God in front of everybody, turns around and gives it back to the mother. Now what's the difference? The difference is it doesn't belong to the mother. You just gave it to God. So you got to take care of it according to whose rules? Not your rules. You just gave it to God. And then what happens? I give it back to the mother, and then the mother doesn't come back to the church for 12 years. You understand why we as priests go out of our minds? Because, well, that's what happens. That's why we, the way we are. Because, you guys are, but we need to tell you. We need to explain it to you.
But people have to want to learn.
Well, that's the other part.
They have to learn that there is more than the books that we read at home. There is more than the presence of God here on Sunday. There is more that we don't know, and we have to find out. And people sometimes say, like you said, I'm going to church, or I have something to do and I'm leaving afterwards. No, it isn't like that. We have to understand the church and the glory of God and the Holy Mother and all the angels are used.
The thing Doug says, I totally agree with you. The difficulty is, and please understand what I'm about to say. I'm not trying to be pedantic here or critical. Is that people are at different levels. So just because a person is 60 years old or 70 years old, spiritually they could be infants. So you don't take an infant and start giving them Shakespeare. You see? So this is the frustration that we have, because now you come to church and I look over a community and I'm saying to myself, okay, there's 90% at the 5th grade level, there's at the 2nd grade level, there's 80% at this level. Then you have people who have turned the church into an ethnic club, and there are people. So you got a whole, you have no idea. So we as preachers, we have to assess and evaluate. And when we give sermons, we have to be very careful how we say and how we structure certain things so it doesn't pull the rug out from some people. But at the same time, you got to give steak to someone who wants it, or else they're going to leave. So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing.
It is not hard, but if you really, truly want to learn about God, you have to come.
Yeah, and that's why we give options, opportunities. Yeah.
You can do it on the Lord. Personally, and I'm truly grateful to you, what I have learned here in Panagia in the last 35 years of this church. From you, and with honor, I say this to you. I have not learned from anyone else.
Well, again, everyone is different.
And everyone is different on their own way.
Yeah.
But you have given us the opportunity and educate us above what we know.
Well, that's my deal. That's why it says to some he are teachers, to some are preachers, to some are pastors, to some are, so everybody has their thing. This is my thing. So it was good for you now. Someone else may need something else. So we as priests, we can't do it all. We don't have it all. We don't have a multiplicity of charisma, graces. We just have whatever God gave us, and we use it to whatever we can. Our job is to give you what we have been given, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not giving you anything that someone hasn't already given to me. It's all mine. I'm giving it to you, and I enjoy doing it, so it's a win-win, right? But I don't want to. But we say an hour. The rule, we're finished. So God bless you. Dios nos bendiga, and we'll see each other prayerfully next week on Sunday, and then at the end of the month for another Bible study. And by then, you'll all have your Bibles, and so we can. My pleasure. We're on the same page.
Same kind of.
I would, thank you.
See, I wouldn't mind right here with Mother for one here, with St. Darius. But if you want, you put it right there.
Have a good week.
Likewise.
Thank you
so much. It's great.
Glad to do it.
Father, when did you do the next one? We put on the calendar July the 7th, but I guess no.
No, it's going to be the first, last Sunday of the week.
So that would be July.
Which is 4th of July.
Oh, I
guess
see.
we went back to the
So you want to do it July 21st? Or the last Sunday?
the last Sunday.
So the 28th. Okay, so I'll put on my calendar. Okay?
Sure. Thank you, Father. We'll see you next week.
Did you like one? Huh? You want to do one? Good one, huh?
So it's not like one per person?
No, just do one, it's not necessary.
So you can include more